In this episode, you'll discover how alimony laws can shape your financial future and what every woman needs to know to protect herself. Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life. This week, we had Sandra Fava on the show, and we had a great conversation about alimony, how it's determined, who's entitled to alimony, and how alimony has changed over the past several years. I hope this episode is valuable to anyone who might be listening. Stay tuned for the full episode. Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Sandra Fava is joining us. Sandra is the founder and managing attorney at Fava Law, a family law practice dedicated to providing compassionate and effective legal counsel to individuals and families in transition. Today, Sandra and I will be discussing what alimony is and how it is determined, who's entitled to alimony, and some changes there have been in alimony over the past several years in New Jersey as well as in Florida. Welcome to the show, Sandra.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, so happy to have you. Love to talk about the law and the differences in the law with other attorneys.
Definitely.
So for our listeners, would you share a little about yourself and how you ended up in family law?
Sure, I'm happy to. I've been practicing about 20 years. How I got here is an interesting story. I'll try to keep it succinct. I am the youngest in my family. My parents are immigrants from Italy. I am the first to attend college and go on to law school. My interest in the law started as a child. I really loved the show People's Court, Judge Wapner, if you can remember this.
I do. I remember.
Yeah.
I remember. Many of our listeners might be too young.
Might not. Then you might need to Google that guy. But
exactly.
I was fascinated with it to the point that, like, if I misbehaved, my mother would say, you can't watch it today. That would be like a punishment for me. And that kind of evolved over time into Ally McBeal. I was a bit older than high school or middle school. I said, I speak a few languages. I really want to be an attorney. And I'm going to be like Ally McBeal. She was a corporate lawyer. So I was like, great, I could travel and do all this. And when I got into law school, my first summer associate position was at a medium-sized firm here in New Jersey that did not have a family law practice, but the supervising partner for me got assigned a pro bono domestic violence case and had zero interest in it, to the point where I was literally handed a file and told, figure this out and tell me where I have to be and when. And so the rest of my work that summer was on toxic tort litigation, which to me was painfully boring. And I had this side assignment here where I was actually working with a human being, getting to know their story and all of that. And it resonated with me because I had a very close family member while I was in middle school go through a very difficult divorce. It took a long time. Many family members were involved financially and as a support system, also as witnesses and accusations. I really saw firsthand how a divorce can shake up a family from the inside out. First person in our family to have gotten divorced. So, it was all new and a learning experience for everyone involved. I resonated with this victim of domestic violence that my family member was also a victim as well. And so I worked on it and wanted us to get her the protection she needed. We ultimately did not at the hearing. That woman, early fall, was in the newspaper. She had been killed by her spouse. That really nailed it for me to pursue family law. I started taking courses. I did a clinic at my law school, helping people who earn under a certain economic salary. So I worked on an international child abduction case in my clinic years, which was very interesting. Took some more classes. One of my professors was like, you really seem to have a knack at this. I was still hesitant. Like, do I want to do family law? Let me just make sure. I worked at small firms, did a bit of everything, interned for a judge in family court, and he offered me a clerkship in New Jersey. They are 1-year positions only in pretty much most of the courts, especially on the county level, which is where I started. I took it, and the rest is history. It's just always, been what I did. And now I can't really imagine. I mean, sure, there are moments where I say like, man, it would be nice to be like a T&E lawyer where you're not fighting about crazy things, but I find it rewarding. You see people in a very fragile state and, through time and working together, I have seen people get their self-confidence, become who they were, navigate a whole new world. I find that rewarding.
We help people navigate difficult times and hopefully come out on the other side with a new outlook on life. Can be better on the other side. So that's great. I agree with you. Family law is special in the impact we can have on our clients' lives.
Absolutely.
Really day to day. Let's talk alimony. One of my favorite things, I love to hear the differences in the states. I have had clients in New Jersey and Florida and worked with other New Jersey attorneys. People are more mobile, even more now with remote work. Often we need to know an attorney in another state because determine, hey, what's the best, where do they handle their issue and which is going to be the best spot for them.
I do feel like our states have a lot of synchrony. I know so many people of different ages who own a second home in Florida or spend half their time there and vice versa. So yeah, I agree. There's a lot of interaction.
Absolutely. So let's start with alimony in New Jersey. 10,000-foot view for our listeners. How does it get determined? What are some of the things?
Sure. The overarching principle of alimony, I think, for most states, but I certainly can only speak to New Jersey, is that no citizen of a state should become a burden upon the state in the event of a life event like divorce. If you are in a partnership, which a marriage is, it's a business partnership with emotional ties. If that partnership should end, the parties should be leaving the relationship on somewhat equal footing. I say somewhat equal footing because I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding because of the language that is used that people don't really appreciate or realize. So in New Jersey, alimony is to help one party, the lesser earning party or the party who's not been in the workforce, maintain the marital standard of living. That's the legal jargon you hear. And the reason that I say it's a misnomer, because when you take one pot of money and you are now splitting that pot amongst two households, it is nearly impossible to have the same exact marital standard of living. When a client comes to me, I'm always surprised when they don't understand that it's not going to happen, right? And they're like, we always did this during the marriage. I had these types of cars and I shopped at these places. It's a lot of undoing the mindset to make people understand we're going to work to get you as close to that as possible. But this standard of living that you had during the marriage, it's just not, again, by and large, there are exceptions, able to maintain the same way when the divorce happens, right? And so that's the idea behind alimony, is that you put people on an equal playing field as much as possible once the marriage ends and that partnership has been dissolved. So in 2015, New Jersey made a statutory amendment to the alimony statute. And that amendment basically eliminated what was previously known as permanent alimony, lifetime alimony. We never in our statute as well had a delegation of the amount of years that you would qualify for any different types of alimony. So the statute did change that. So in New Jersey, what permanent alimony was replaced with is open durational alimony. And basically, if you've been married for 15 years or longer, you are a candidate for open durational alimony. But your length of your marriage is not the only factor that is being considered. Actual practice is that some of the factors were being given greater consideration. For example, the length of the marriage and the age of the parties, in my experience, had always been like the focus, right? And there were other factors that were listed in the statute were not given the same weight by practitioners and even some judges. And so the statute does make it clear now that all of the factors are to be given equal weight. No one factor should dominate. We look at the length of the marriage, the age and the health of the parties, the incomes earned during the marriage, their educational levels, the time out of the workforce, the amount of assets divided, and what those assets may throw off as far as income or the ability to earn income to help support a party, the ages of any children, as well as the child care responsibilities for those children are all factors we look at. Alimony has been given a more equal, in my opinion, deliberation when it comes up in a case. So we have open durational, which starts after 15 years or longer. We also made retirement at your Social Security retirement age an automatic cause to seek either a modification or a termination of alimony. Prior to that, in New Jersey, you had to prove that you were retiring in good faith. And once you met that first burden, and only if you met that first burden, then would the court look at the second prong, which was that a supported spouse still had a need for your support. The amendment made it so that once you reach Social Security retirement age and retire, that you have retired in good faith. And now we start at whether or not the other party still needs support. That was a change. We also have rehabilitative alimony, which we've always had, which is a type of alimony that allows somebody who's got education and had some work experience but has been out of the market or the workforce for a period of time to kind of re-up their skills, get more training with the idea of becoming self-sufficient. There's alimony to get them there. We have short-term or limited duration alimony based on a term of alimony. A number of years, usually calculated by the number of years of your marriage, is a big factor when we look at that. But again, all of the other factors are going to play a part of it. Cohabitation is a part of our alimony statute. So if you can demonstrate that your spouse is cohabiting with an individual in a relationship akin to marriage, you have an application there for modification or termination, depending on.
They all happened at the same time, right? Because you didn't.
Yeah, so we had cohabitation in case law, but it wasn't a part of the statute. Cleaned up some things that had developed over time, and these statutes are antiquated in large part. Isn't what applied hundreds of years ago, and when you're applying it to modern families, some of it doesn't always make sense. So, in part, it was a lot of doing that and getting those things in one spot, figuring out what we should do and having some guidance for judges and practitioners so we could give better advice and properly litigate or strategize with a case. There was a lot of unclearness in the law, which there always is. You're never going to get rid of the gray areas, but this provided more direction. New Jersey debated about whether there should be an alimony calculator. Some other states, and I don't know if Florida is one, I know New York has an alimony calculator similar to a child support calculator. Ultimately, we did not do that. We kept with the statutory analysis that would apply to each specific family situation.
Now, what is your opinion on these changes and it all being codified in the statutes and that effect upon women? Do you have an opinion? Do you think it was good? Do you think it was bad? How do you think that has impacted?
I think it's good for the general population that we have more clarity. There used to be a lot of room to litigate and argue over issues that if we weren't wearing our attorney's hat and you said, okay, they've been married 20 years, but these people are 30 or 40 years old, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's healthy. They both have the ability to work. Their kids are teenagers. Like, why should somebody be on the hook to support somebody when they both have the ability to re-enter the workforce? Or should it be open durational? Should it be long-term just because it's a 20-year marriage? It gave clarity for men and women to understand kind of here, and let's face it, more women now than ever before are paying alimony. They are the obligee who is on the hook to pay alimony to their spouse. It makes sense to know your obligations and risks for making decisions within your family.
We had a huge amount of changes in 2023 in Florida as it relates to alimony and just changes in the family law that we had not seen in many years. Part of that is to provide clarity. Before, when we got a formula, it was litigated more, and
Yeah.
the better attorney would win. If you could show the ability to pay, I took many cases to trial and won on alimony. We were really good at proving and working through on those financials. But that was costly to all parties and time consuming because there wasn't more direction.
Yeah.
So it's, well, can their attorney prove it? And a lot of times I think, which we know happens in family law, one side is just not willing to agree they're going to pay alimony. So a trial just has to be done because
Yes.
that, and those were a lot of those cases as well.
The risk is, in my experience, you're in front of a judge who makes decisions, and because they're human, have implicit biases, and you're risking as a woman how you're going to be viewed, even in mediation, right? Not having a formula or a calculation still gives you that risk. And that's the downside women face, especially as we become more modern world. It's not so much valued that you're at home raising kids, and you'll still have to, because despite a divorce, your spouse travels for their job, and they're gone multiple days a week, or they have really late hours, maybe they work in the medical field or law enforcement, things that those are kind of not valued, in my opinion, in the way that they were when I first started practicing 20 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, and you want to, in a lot of ways, it does change with a lot of the times. However, there are still families
That's right.
where they require much more work by the mother, the woman, and it's not always accounted for in the divorce.
No.
And it does make it difficult for them to earn, and they've lost so many years in the workforce, which is important to understand your options if you are entitled to alimony.
Yeah. No matter how great your facts are, the award of alimony is still not what it should be. There's a lot of ways to manipulate lifestyle and money. If you're up against a spouse who has been divorce planning, it's prevalent. In my experience, judges don't want to hear it. It's difficult to prove. I have had a situation right now where I literally have a smoking gun, like a piece of paper in this person's handwriting, divorce planning on top, the attorney they spoke to, bullet points of what they were told to do. They executed those things. And I have a judge who's just like, I'm not interested in that.
I know, and that is, I think, one of the things that is such a risk. And I think, especially for our listeners to hear, and it's disheartening, but it's true that often judges, I'm not sure if it's similar in New Jersey, we have like the family law section. So all of those judges do family law. Some, they don't want to hear it. They think you should, as a woman, even though you've got children, he's gone, you should go get a job. Sometimes female judges are harder on women. It's a far different landscape than 20 years ago. And
I agree.
I think that is where, it is risky. You just don't know. But so important to have an attorney, because once you sign to a judge, your attorney can advise you, because you want to know, like, hey, how do they typically view these things, right? How do they handle time sharing, parenting plans, alimony support? Because you can make better decisions and potentially settle, not leave it up to someone who, like, this isn't that big of a deal. I'm looking at domestic violence or child abuse in another divorce.
Right.
Your problems don't rise to that level. It's unfortunate. They should count them all equal and give them the time, but they don't always. They're humans.
In New Jersey, our judges are not elected. They're appointed by a committee of our Senate. There's no requirement that they have experience in family law if they're in the family part, or criminal law if they're in the criminal division. Most new judges, I'm not quite sure, are the brand new judges are start in family. And so
I think somebody thinks, they can't do much damage. It's like, oh my gosh, they can do so much damage.
So much damage, yes.
It's
and they don't,
simple.
and I can tell you, and I know I'm not alone. I've had this conversation with many of my colleagues throughout the years. Some judges don't hide it. They don't want to be there. There's a reason they didn't practice family law. And so they don't put the effort or time in. Other people think like, oh, it's just family law. But what I've always said is I don't know another practice area where you have to know family law, tax law, criminal law, a bit of real estate planning to encompass one unit. And for these people, what is more important than their family and their dynamic? It's just so backwards.
Like that's all they've got. It really is. It is unfortunate.
When people are interviewing me, I'm always say, I say this on other podcasts and my own podcast. When you're looking for an attorney to represent you, there's certain things that you should be looking for and asking. How well do you know the judges in the county where my case is going to be decided? How often are you there? How many cases have you tried? Are you an attorney who tries cases? Are you an attorney who pushes things more towards settlement? Do you do mediation? Can you wear all the hats? Do you have a focus in this case? Because there are some attorneys, again, who are great attorneys, but they will not try cases. That's just not something that they want to do as part of their practice. So they'll bring a person to a certain point, and then that person finds out, they have to start all over. You need to take control of the process. The control starts early in your decision on representation and being realistic in what your case is going to take to get it done. If you have a difficult spouse, things have been contentious and argumentative and, there's secrets and all this stuff. It is so unrealistic to expect that because you've hired an attorney or you've started a divorce process through the courts, that person is all of a sudden going to become reasonable. Mm-hmm. They're frustrated with the process. Take a step back and be really honest with yourself about what is going to happen here. Hope for the worst, plan for the best. It makes it easier to work with your team when, everybody's got the blinders off and we know what we need to do and we're on the same page about getting it done. I don't know. That's been my experience. My New Year mantra is like, be realistic in who you are dealing with, I feel like.
Well, and because, and for our listeners, you were married to him. It's women winning divorce. I'm talking to the women list. Like, you're married to him. Do not think this is going to be some new person who's now suddenly super agreeable, feels really guilty, and is going to agree to everything, or that, he'll be so embarrassed. He would never do that.
Yeah.
Just don't, like you said, take off the blinders, help your attorney understand the situation, because then we can help you prepare more realistically. So often this happens, it just seems to be in the same vein. We'll have women come in. And I'm like, all right, okay, that's fair. We will do that, but we have to agree on how much money and time you're willing to spend for this agreement. Because if you keep making us wait 6 months back and forth, we have mandatory mediation. So we know we're going to mediation. And if that's the best place to settle, because usually everybody is even in the Zoom now, but all in the same place. Right. With their attorney, agreements are written the same time, people are signing, and it's because they'll get upset, right? They're like, oh, it's been 6 months. We haven't done anything. It's like, because you don't want to. You're just trying to placate them and think it's going to be an agreement with somebody that that's not their personality.
Correct.
So I agree. Taking off the blinders, being honest about who your husband is and how you think they'll react, because you're probably right. Could we be pleasantly surprised?
Yes. We'll take that any day.
Absolutely. Sure. This is of interest to me because I'm a law geek like that, because we don't have this in Florida. So I want to talk about alimony. Yeah. That is something completely different from anything we have here in Florida. And I would love for you to tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So alimony it is super interesting. It's really easy to geek out on it. Unfortunately, it's not as much of a legal hot topic as it once was here in New Jersey, because New Jersey amended its statute of frauds to include alimony. So for your listeners, the statute of frauds, and most states have adopted some version of it, requires that any contract for a certain amount has to be in writing. Before the statute of fraud was amended, I actually worked on the case that went up to the Supreme Court to talk about whether palimony could be retroactively applied in a situation. So our case law had developed what I would say is as a generic stereotypical example of somebody who had probably been married and divorced once before, got into a new relationship, typically with a younger woman, and made promises to take care of them. And this woman forgone her childbearing years, left her job to be by this man's side, to either travel with him for work or just to be there, gave up her social life, things like that, and did all of the things that you would expect a wife to do. And then the relationship ends and they're left with nothing. Palimony came from those dynamics based on a contract claim that there was a verbal promise for support, for lifetime support, and that verbal contract was broken when the relationship ended. You would look at the actions of the parties during the relationship, right? We had things where people would hold themselves out on Facebook as husband and wife, or call themselves their wife or their husband, even though they weren't legally married, or they'd be given a promise ring, be in each other's wills. Friends would socialize them. People who didn't know them well would think they were married. A body of case law developed about that. The statute of frauds said there was confusion about where these cases should be litigated. Should they be in the family part? Because they are family, but also based on contract principles. Should they be in the chancery part? So we kind of, when I first started practicing, there was a lot of confusion. Kind of in New Jersey, it wasn't a uniform decision. And it all got pushed into the family part to be decided. The statute of frauds was amended to include palimony claims, which says if you're in this relationship, get it in writing. Otherwise, you can't enforce this contract. In practice, who's going to sign a writing like that? Now that people understand what it is and, have some understanding of it, people don't put those things in writing. We've seen a lot of decline in the cases. But when that amendment to the statute of frauds happened, the case I worked on went up to the Supreme Court was whether or not that statute of frauds should be applied retroactively, because under the statute, and if you look at the judicial, history of the case, what happened in the Senate while they were looking to amend the statute, there was a lot of conversation about that. Ultimately, we did not prevail. It was not retroactively applied, only going forward.
It's the same whether you have children or not. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or does that change it at all? No.
No, you probably have better facts if you have children with this person. Right. By the way, palimony was a lump sum payment. So it wasn't like alimony, even though they're like this mixture of words. It wasn't like an annual or a payment monthly that would go on for a certain number of years. It was, a lump sum payment on the contract breach. The reason that children didn't have much impact, in my opinion, is because children have their own legal right to child support under New Jersey law. It's not a right that parents can really waive, because it's a right that belongs to a child or to children themselves. Right. So they're not left, without a recourse.
Now, I know we're not talking about child support, but you mentioned it in the beginning. Do you have a child support formula in New Jersey?
We have a calculator that it does max out with a combined net income of around 185,000, I want to say. It might be in 180. I think it's 183,700. It's some weird combined net income, which for most residents of this, or many residents of New Jersey, we use the calculator to get to that max. And then we have statutory factors and case law that we really look at to decide what the child or children of this family need or require in order to continue to have the life that they've had. So there's a lot of case law on it. Former Giants football player Michael Stranahan, it was a big part of his divorce here in New Jersey, child support. We've also had, I think it was Hall & Oates, one of the singers. He was the first to bring that issue to light about what happens when combined net income exceeds clearly this limit here, and how do you figure out what a child needs. And just because you have a high income earner, does that mean that child needs to have, designer clothing? Or, one of the things that came out of the Hall & Oates case was that no child needs more than 2 ponies. That's part of our jurisprudence.
I think it makes sense that, when it caps out and then you have the high earners, there are going to be other things that should be considered Florida, we don't do it as often, and there's not a lot of case law on that. Like all additional factors, they enter into the formula, and then there is, a percentage like where you can go up or down, unless it's
Okay.
negotiated. But it's unfortunate because there are, families, and if there's just a lot of income on one side, they're still maxed
Yes.
out. And generally during the divorce, they're not extremely generous. And no, you can buy the car, or who's paying the insurance. If the mom is receiving alimony and child support, that alimony can only be for her needs. Children's needs are separate, and child
Correct.
support never covers children's needs.
In a state like New Jersey, where we have a high cost of living,
Mm-hmm.
what the calculator will spit out, whether you're in it or above it, is not what it costs. I have 3 children. I can tell you very clearly what it costs to raise each one of them, and $150 a week is not going to cut it.
Yeah,
And what the child support is even supposed to cover.
Mm-hmm.
We have this appendix to our court rules that tells you what's included. It includes recreational sports. It includes, but it doesn't include some of the equipment. But some of the equipment it does include. So it's like very specific about what kind of cleats might be included, but the baseball bat or a glove would be included. The cell phone, the plan isn't part of the child support. Things like this. It's ridiculous. I often say you have to think about this because this isn't enough. And the answer is I'll do more if I wanted. Unfortunately for many women and the disadvantaged economic earner, child support is held over your head, used as bait to get you to do or give up something else. Even after a divorce, there's some control, intentional or subconscious, that doesn't go away.
I agree. And I know most of our listeners have heard us talk about that. And it's true. And that's where I think it's so important to have an attorney, especially if you're the non-breadwinner and you really, one, need to understand, hey, where would we be situated financially? And then get as much as you can, which is what I've always told people. Like, hey, it's not going to be where you are now, but we'll get as much as, we'll work to get as much as we can to put you in the best situation possible. But certainly.
And one of the easy things people can do is, if you have like multiple children, if your eldest is doing an activity like hockey, which is the most expensive extracurricular activity your child can participate in, then you might want to build it in, even though your other child or children may not have started hockey. If they want to do it, they should automatically be grandfathered in with the right to do it. Mm-hmm. And, the premise is that we're going to treat the kids fairly. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander type of, an analysis. And I think you'll find that even in contentious situations, you may get a lot more movement when you position it like that. Then it's already in your agreement. You don't have to fight about it. You're treating the kids fairly. I'm amazed when I get a post-divorce matter and they're fighting. I see documents that don't talk about it. I have a client saying, well, she rode horses since she was 2 and we used to own a horse. Why isn't it in this document? It's just those little things you as the client may not realize. But again, doing your homework and making sure your representation really knows these things, because that's what you're paying for, right? You're paying for our experience and expertise in this area of law. You can't just go on, what you might see on Instagram or what your, friend told you, who your cousin used or your coworker, because every situation is unique. And you got to find somebody that's going to fit your family situation or what your goals are. It's really important.
I think that is very important. It absolutely. And a lot, in communication on those types of things, and really spending time as the client reflecting on what's important so that you communicate it so that then, it does get addressed. I can't believe we're almost out of time. This has been a great conversation. I maybe have you back and go deeper into other issues. Sandra, before we go, can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience?
Women and children, and I throw them in together because they're often, part and parcel. The resilience that they can show, especially through something as, I'm going to say, traumatic, because there's a lot of research out there that tells you that going through the divorce process is similar to the death of a loved one. You go through all of the wheels of emotion, the shock, the anger, the grief, and back and forth again. But women really, we know how to push through it, prioritize what's important, in particular our children. I think what people or male sometimes think is a weakness of women is our ability to ask for help or to know when we need help. I think that should be more celebrated than treated as a negative. As difficult as your situation is, you will come out on the other side. The freedom and relief you will then have, you just have to give yourself grace to get there. Nearly all clients that are women have said, it was awful, but my life is so much better. I'm so much happier now. Part of that, is how you get through this process with your representation, but how you take care of yourself, right? And how you recognize what you or your family needs.
Lastly, Sandra, where can our listeners find you for more information and resources?
Yeah, sure. I have a website, favalawNJ.com. I'm on social media. So we have a Fava Law LLC Instagram page. I have a Facebook page. I'm on LinkedIn. And I also have my own podcast, which you can find on my website. So their episodes are hosted there. And, Heather, maybe you can then join me on that as well. Yeah. We could talk about another differences in Florida and New Jersey law for sure.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We have reached the end of our show today. It's been such a pleasure to have Sandra Fava as our guest today, joining us to discuss what alimony is, the many differences between Florida and New Jersey, and who's entitled to alimony, palimony. It certainly has changed over the past few years, and it was great dissecting that with you today.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Listeners, if you or someone you know in the Northeast Florida area is going through or even thinking about divorce, you're not alone. Taking that first step can feel overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. Our newsletter is filled with actionable advice tailored to guide you through this process. By signing up, you'll gain the tools to face the unknown with courage and see if we're the right fit to support you during this life-changing time. Don't wait. Click the link in the show notes, fill out the form, and take the first step toward building a brighter future today.